This is the long-awaited Final Fantasy VII Remake discussion. I played this game at launch. Zach played it shortly after. Kevin took a sweet time, and he played it 6 months after it originally
I
came
got
out.
there, okay?
You did. You did. We were just saying I'm glad you got it in before the end of the year, before our top 10 PS4 games list. So it's up for full consideration for that. But I'm glad we're finally sitting down to have this discussion. This is one of my favorite games from the year. And I know you guys both enjoyed it a lot as well. So for this discussion, it's kind of going to be 3 parts, just like the remake could end up being. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
So
Or
part
10.
1,
Probably.
we're going to talk about the gameplay, the world, the side quests, things like that we enjoyed about this experience and maybe didn't enjoy. Then in part 2, we're going to talk about the story from this game leading up to where it leads off. We'll get into full spoilers at that point. Actually, the whole thing, I'm just going to say, is full spoilers. So if you haven't played it, you shouldn't be listening to this episode.
That's what a Spoilercast is, right?
For part 3, Kevin's actually going to step away because he has not played the original and has no clue what happens beyond the point that Remake Part 1 leaves off at. But because of all the craziness that happens at the end of Remake Part 1 that kind of suggests they're going to launch this thing in a different direction, Zach and I are going to stick around to talk about kind of the differences we already see with where the story could be headed compared to what happens in the original. So it's going to be a fun discussion.
And then after that, we're going to spend 30 minutes diving into Advent Children and our thoughts on that movie.
That movie is terrible.
Crisis Core.
It is Dirge Cerberus.
There's a book. I forgot what it's called.
I can't remember if the book is canon or not. It's really messy.
I'm pretty sure it is. Doesn't matter.
We're going to talk about the gameplay first. So this was a big shift from the original Final Fantasy VII, which was a turn-based JRPG. This one now combines some of those classic turn-based elements, but with more action-based combat. So on a base level, Kevin, we'll start with you. What did you think about the combat in Final Fantasy VII Remake?
Yeah, so this is coming from someone who didn't play the original, so I didn't have a chance to get attached to that original turn-based style, but I have played turn-based RPGs in the past. I liked it a lot. I thought it was a ton of fun swapping between the characters as you build them up, and they all have their different skill sets that you can use at any one time. And as you go along later into the game with the different boss fights that it throws at you, you do have to be relatively strategic about how you swap between these characters and use them at certain points for what the enemy is doing. You know, you've got Tifa, who's very close range attacks, which can be great or can backfire on you depending on what the enemy is doing. You have Barrett for long range for different enemies that are harder to get for someone like Tifa who can't jump up and grab them if they're in the air. You've got Cloud, who is kind of a mix between the both with his materia as well that you can use. And then you have Aerith for healing. So I really like the dynamic of swapping between them as you're fighting, and to have their different skill sets play out. And I think their skill sets are more interesting in this new battle style. Like, if you're thinking back to an older RPG style, it's not as big of a deal that Barrett is, like a gunner or long range or something. It's not as big of a deal. Mm-hmm. But here, enemies are in different locations and he has more versatility with his certain abilities. So that kind of changes up how you use characters. So on a baseline, that change, despite not having played the first one, I really enjoyed how the combat turned out, just on a base level of swapping between the characters and their different abilities.
Yeah, on swapping between characters, I really loved that part of it because it still, in a lot of ways, felt like a turn-based JRPG does, because even though it is action combat, you're freely controlling all these characters, you still have to watch for those ATB bars to fill up, right? And that's when you should switch. Like, if Barrett has 2 unused bars, you should switch to him. So it just kind of naturally works itself out that you are constantly switching between the characters, and it's kind of almost like everyone gets their turn based on when these gauges are full. And when they're all rebuilding, yeah, you can switch to your favorite character or the character that fits the most against the enemy types that you're dealing with. But I think when the combat really clicked for me was when it kind of hit that you will be the best if you switch between all 3 and use their ATB gauges. Or if you just bring up the command menu and order someone to use their special move, even if you're not controlling them. That was an option too. That was really nice. Like, if you really want to keep using Cloud, if you're charging something up for him, but Barrett has a long range move he can use to take out a turret, you can just tell him to do that. I just really liked how that system all flowed. I feel like it gave you a lot of player choice in how you really wanted to tackle battles, and I thought that was a lot of fun.
And it kept you from just maining one character. for the whole
Yeah,
Yeah,
time.
exactly.
Which I did for the beginning of the game.
Right, but
Yeah.
as you get along later into the game with the boss fights that it throws at you, you really do have to take advantage of swapping between the characters to use their specials at the right time. And I appreciated that it did force you to swap between the characters, because then you can find out which characters you do really like playing that maybe you wouldn't have swapped to originally, because you're like, oh, I like this one character, fine, and you're just rolling with them, but it forces you to swap between them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it flowed really well. I at the beginning played a lot as Cloud, and then when it forces you to maintain those ATBs and maintain other characters, I thought that the balance between the old classic turn-based and the new fast-paced action style, I thought it was super good. I also like the materia that we were able to put on each character, so you can kind of combine different magic styles. Like you would have Barrett as, have wind, lightning, all that stuff. So you would have these options to balance and, have like the, what was it called? The scanning. So you could have one character scanning the
Assess,
enemy while the other characters are attacking. And I don't know why, but I've always felt like the characters were like not doing anything if I wasn't playing as them. I thought they were pretty worthless, so I would be constantly switching and using the ATB and then switching off, and then someone would die, I'd have to heal them, stuff like that. So I thought the character management in terms of the combat was super cool. It always kept you really focused, even if you weren't super paying. I felt like a lot of the times I was paying more attention to my team than I was to the enemies. So that was interesting. But overall, huge fan.
The part that was brutal, I think, was that items are tied to the ATB gauge. So if you're all dying and no one has an ATB gauge, it's like
you can't use it.
Oh,
you just gotta hope that you can like run away and just like stay away from attacks for a little while until you get one ATB charge and then use an item or use a healing spell.
And also, I think this is something Kevin brought up a lot when he was going through the game. The only thing I found a little bit frustrating about the combat, was that you didn't always know what materia you needed going into like a big boss fight. So then sometimes you'd like have to grind your way through it or just kind of give up and say, okay, I'll set my materia accordingly this time, which was a little bit annoying, but it's not that big of a nip.
It was
brute
funny,
forced
though,
my way through every fight.
In those situations where you do go back and do it again with the right materia unlocked, some of those boss fights just turn into nothing. Like I had one guy who obliterated me the first time. Then I swapped to the materia that he was weak against, and he fell over in seconds. Like, it is interesting that there are some fights where you just have to know their weakness. But,
I scanned nobody. I didn't know anyone's weakness. I fought them all with my sword.
That sounds terrible. That sounds really terrible.
I beat the game.
But it was really nice about how it handled you going back and doing it again, because it would set you back just before the fight so that you could redo your materia and then go into the fight when you felt like you were ready. It didn't just like restart the fight. You could go back and reslot everything.
Yeah, so we're all big fans of the combat, and the combat actually really helped propel me to I did every side quest in this game. And I actually really liked how it was set up too. So there are 3 chapters throughout the game, which are the dedicated side quest chapters. Or there are 4? I think there might be 4, because there's 2 slums, Wall Market, and then the big final one.
Yeah.
Where you have to go and do all these side quests. And for the first time in a very long time, I did every side quest. And I think it's because I just found the combat very engaging the whole way through. I enjoyed doing fights from start to almost finish when there are 10 bosses in a row. But I loved the combat the entire way through. And that allowed me to really just dive into the side quest, even though, let's be real, they're pretty generic JRPG side quests. Go kill all the rats, go kill all of these, go get me these items, go do this. Like they're not the most compelling side quests, but just the way it was laid out, like, oh, do these 6 things before advancing the story, it was really easy for me to just kind of take a break, explore the city or the slums I was in, and just do all the side quests. So I really enjoyed that part of it too.
Yeah, I also did all of the side quests. It helped that with some of those chapters, they would give you exclusive cutscenes with the characters if you did all of the side quests. So that was another push for me to do all of the side quests in a certain chapter. And it didn't seem like the quests were just like completely dumped on you. They found a nice balance of having only a certain amount of quests in each chapter. The last one was a little bit much, but I mean it was the last one before your before you're going off, so it wasn't too big of a deal. But I did appreciate that it was only the 6 quests for those first 3 quest chapters. It didn't feel like you were stopping for hours and hours to finish all these, knowing that you're not going to be able to go back and do them. It fed you them at a pretty good pace so that you didn't get overwhelmed.
Yep.
Yeah, and speaking of pacing, I think that's something that a lot of people were worried about with this game being split up into multiple parts and saying, hey, we're going to stretch the first 5 hours of Final Fantasy VII into a 30-hour experience. I think people were worried it was going to just feel like bloat for most of it, but I really didn't feel that way throughout the entire game. Like, I really liked...
Until the end.
Until the end. I really liked how much we got to see secondary Avalanche members, Jesse, Wedge, and Biggs.
Mm-hmm.
We saw them. They're in the original for like 10 minutes.
Yep.
They are there, the
Nothing.
plate falls, and they are dead. And it is over. You don't do anything with them that you do in...
I forgot they existed going into the remake, having just played the original game.
Yeah, and like, Jesse is like... I mean, in the original, it's like, oh, is Cloud supposed to be with Tifa or with Aerith? And now, like, Jesse's another option in this game because she's in it that much. She's in it a lot for the first part until, stuff happens. Yeah, but I really liked seeing them fleshed out.
I mean, it's a spoiler cast. We can say what happens.
Yeah, she dies.
She died.
She did.
But as someone who I played the entire Midgar section, and then I played the remake, and then I played the rest of the original. And I liked all of the additions basically they made to flesh this thing out. Zach, you also played both. What did you think of kind of the sections they padded out and made longer compared to the original?
I think they did a really good job for the most part. I know there was some of that bloat at the end, like we were talking about, with just unnecessary missions, tasks, open all these doors, crap like that. That's the kind of bloat that you don't like to see. The rest of it felt just fine. They expanded, they added all the cutscenes. The cutscenes added a lot of time. The side quest stuff, that added a lot of time. The extra missions, extra side stuff, all very good. But it still retained pretty much all the important story, and it just fleshed it out. It didn't stretch it out. It fleshed it out. It added more, went in depth. It was all very interesting. I don't think any of it was, overplayed or, went in the wrong direction. I thought the direction that it was heading was very good, and I think it retained what it was looking for in terms of loyalty to the original.
Yeah, basically, they added a lot of story stuff, like I said, with those 3 characters, and even just fleshing out Cloud more as a character, because, like, in the original, he's very unlikable for almost the entire game. And in this one, he kind of gets that arc of growth just in Midgar, right? Like, you like Cloud, I think, by the end.
Everyone gets a lot more in this game. In terms of the Midgar section.
But then there will be sections that are totally extended, like the train graveyard. You rip through that pretty quick in the original, and then in the remake, it's like you got to go in this depot and fight all these ghosts, and then it's all these like children who have been left behind, and like it's just this huge expanded outside story that doesn't exist whatsoever in the original. And I really liked all those additions. Kevin, you didn't play the original. What did you think of the pacing throughout the game? Was there stuff to you that felt like fluff?
Definitely things near the end we've mentioned before, but I thought, as someone who didn't play the original before, playing through this one, there were a bunch of moments where I later found out that wasn't in the original, but I wasn't able to discern that. Like, I didn't like, for example, the biker dude, right? He's not in there at all.
He is not.
But as I was playing
What's
through,
his name?
I couldn't. I don't know what his name is.
I think it's Roche. I'm pretty sure
Roche.
his name is
R-O-C-H-E.
Joseph.
But like, I couldn't
Joseph
tell you
Sinclair.
that he wasn't in the original. And I think that's the mark of quality of them putting in this new stuff beyond just expanding the characters that are already there. I feel like that's entirely necessary when you're expanding this out from 5 hours to 30 hours. But in terms of adding new characters, that can get a little dicey when they aren't in the original and maybe they feel like they're tacked on. But for me, having not played the original, it didn't feel like that. And it didn't, I couldn't tell you which things were new and which things were still there from the original. And I feel like that is the mark of quality for something like this, where they're trying to stretch it out and add in a bunch of stuff.
even having played the original, there were moments when I was playing the remake where I had to like stop and think, like, was this in the original? I don't really remember,
Hmm.
because it all seemed like it fit very well. And I liked Roche a lot. I thought he was a very good. He fit with the Turks.
Yeah.
Very cool character.
Yeah, I expected him to come back and he just doesn't. So I'm hoping
Nope.
we'll see him in a future part because he just doesn't roll back in. He's like, "We'll fight again, Cloud," and then you do not. So hopefully he is in a future.
I would assume they have more plans for him.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be a really weird random ad if they didn't. But let's get more into the story, and specifically, this isn't going to be nearly as long of a discussion as our Last of Us Part 2 one was earlier this year. So we're going to keep it more brief. But I mostly want to talk about kind of how this thing ends with the ghosts, the harbingers
The
of fate.
biggest change.
Because this was the most controversial point of the story, and I figured it out really early on in the game.
I was confused the entire game. I'm not as smart as Logan. I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, so I just played Midgar and then I booted up the remake, and I noticed probably after the third time that these ghosts showed up, the Dementors basically is what they look like.
Yep.
That they were showing up to make sure the events of the original Final Fantasy VII happened as they originally occurred. So, for example, if like Wedge almost dies, right, and the ghosts save him, or when he's trying to get out as the plate is going to crush him and he doesn't. Like the ghosts are there to make sure that the events of the original don't change. And that's when they show up, as if something is going off the beaten path, off course. These ghosts roll in and block people from leaving places and just make sure it happens. It's why Cloud couldn't stop the plate from collapsing when Rude and red hair guy Reno. When Reno and Rude blew it up, it's why the ghost showed up, because that's how it had to happen in the original. And basically, Red 13 explains that later when you're in the Shinra Tower near the end. And the whole game wraps up with you going and literally fighting fate itself.
A lot
and you
of them.
win. And that opens up Final Fantasy VII Remake to be its own thing. And I personally love how this all worked out. It is a little Kingdom Heartsy, for sure.
Yes.
It's convoluted. But I think it is
the original game was convoluted.
That Final Fantasy VII Remake acknowledges in-game basically that it's a remake, and it kind of questions what is a remake, what can it be, how different can it be from the original while still staying faithful. And I really liked the whole meta factor of it, that it is asking these questions within the game itself, and really kind of breaking the conventions of a traditional remake. And I hope it's willing to go somewhere completely different after this. We don't know. We have no clue where it's going to go, but I loved that it really was self-aware in that way of it being a remake. I want to know what you guys thought of it.
Yeah, so I thought the meta take and the change of fate, I think that's a super cool idea. Since we played the original right before, we didn't have a huge attachment to the original story. We liked it, but this change could be good for moving forward. In terms of people not liking it, I get it. People who played the original when it first came out on PS1, they're super loyal to the game. They heard this remake was coming out. They expected it to be, the story that they love, expanded out, brought to them in a beautiful portrayal. So I get why they're hesitant about, this changes everything. The story is going to be completely different. It's probably going to suck. I think I'm super excited to see where it goes, because I'm glad that I know I think that at this point, you should know what the original is, just so you know how far off the beaten path they go. So, Kevin, I think you should play the original.
I think so too.
If I've got time.
But I liked it a lot. I did not see it coming. I did not figure out that these Dementors were trying to keep the original story going. I was like, these ghosts are just screwing with people all over the place. Get out of here, ghosts. Yeah, these annoying ghosts. Get out of here. So that was super cool when Red 13 had to sit me down and explain it to me, because I'm slow, which is fine. I like Red 13. But yeah, I think it's super cool. Kevin?
Yeah, having not played the first one, it didn't even dawn on me until now. Now that you're saying it, I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
You never know.
Because they were talking about fate, and it was just like, okay, so this is just how the events are fated to happen. It didn't it didn't dawn on me that it was in relationship to the first game.
Yeah.
But it is kind of fun how they give themselves the ability in game and acknowledge it that they have
to just do whatever they want
to make something new. And that's risky in terms of the people who aren't going to be happy about it changing, and the fact that it may not be as good. That's the risk that you take, that whatever you decide to come up with for these later parts, you know, may not be as strong as that original game, both in general or just in the eyes of the fans. But as the years go on, I feel like you have a bunch of new people on these projects that maybe want to try and tell some of their own stories within the framework of this, and you still have the original to go back to. So for the people who haven't played the original or aren't super attached to it, I think that this could be really cool and go off in like a really cool new direction. But I do feel for some fans who have had this story and this experience for decades, and now it's just it could be completely different, and that could be hard because it's just one story that you know the story beats, and then you go into this remake wanting those story beats to be there, and they're just not. And I feel like the amount of dissatisfaction that you have with the changes that they make is related to the amount of time that you've had since you played that original, because that's just more time for that to sink in.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's just also depends on what kind of fan you are. Like, I've been thinking about this, and like, I also get why people who are love the original would be upset. But if Final Fantasy VII, the original, were my favorite game of all time, I think I'd be thrilled by this, because that original will always be there for you. It will always exist. But now you're saying I have the chance to see new story and new places and new characters in my favorite game of all time. I think of it in the context of Ocarina of Time, which is one of my favorite games of all time. If Nintendo came out and remade that and changed what happens, I would be thrilled. That would blow my mind. I would think it was awesome because that original is there and I can go back and play it. Granted, Ocarina of Time is still far more playable, in my opinion, in 2020 than Final Fantasy VII. I do not think that game was very playable in 2020, but still, that original is there for you to enjoy and love. And if you are an original Final Fantasy VII fan, like, I urge you, get on board with this, because this is super cool. It's something that hasn't really been done before. Like, it's really risky, and I'm just totally on board. And it also sold me on the idea that this thing is multiple parts, because before you're like, why aren't they just going it all in one go? But now it's because we need the first part to establish that part 2, 3, however many more could be different. I just think it's fantastic. I love the direction they're going with it, as long as it doesn't become too convoluted. If it stays relatively grounded and they tell a good, coherent story, I'll be thrilled. But if it goes off into La La Land, that won't be great.
And it depends on how far they stretch it out and how many parts they want to make out of this. Because you have to keep it relatively succinct. The more you add and the more parts you try and decide to make this, the more bloat that could show up and the more it could take away from the actual main story that's being told if there's just a bunch of extraneous stuff that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of the main story.
Well,
so honestly, I think... Oh, go ahead, Zach.
Sorry, yeah, I've been thinking about this because we were talking about how at the end of the remake they did away with fate. So I'm wondering that if in the second part of the remake they introduce some sort of element of choice where you as the player get to decide what fate you want to go down, where you want to be more loyal to the original story, or you're able to make some decisions that lead you in potentially a different direction. I think that would be super cool. I think it's a little complicated. Might be a little too hard to...
Because then how do you have a part 3 after a part 2?
Exactly. Because, you have part 3 of Life is Strange. You got part 3 of The Walking Dead. You know, that's crazy. You could do. It just picks up where your last save left off.
Yeah, so but the problem with those games is that your choices aren't that meaningful.
They are meaningful. Episodic choice games don't work.
We've heard after this game came out, we heard that they are actually going to stick to the original pretty closely, is what we've heard. Okay. I hope they're lying to us. I don't want that to be true. I want them to go off in a crazy direction because I want it to get
weird.
Yeah. But I mean, I can't help but compare. Final Fantasy VII Remake is so much like Star Wars: The Last Jedi to me, which is my favorite Star Wars movie, because it's a game and that was a movie that really subverts fans' expectations. And the backlash was severe because you have these people who are playing with things very sacred to people. And with Star Wars, we saw the biggest rubber band I have ever seen where episode 9 undoes everything that episode 8 did, and it's like all that cool stuff we set up, forget it. This is the Star Wars you know and love. And I'm worried that's what's going to happen this, because Final Fantasy VII fans weren't very happy.
You think they're going to backtrack?
Thing. I mean, the fact that it totally seems like they're setting it up to do something crazy in the next entry, and then 2 weeks after the game comes out, Tetsuya Nomura is like, "Oh, we're sticking to the original. Don't worry about it." Oh, but was that always the plan, or did you want to do something new and now you are not willing to commit to it?
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
Because
I don't know.
If they want to please anyone, it would probably be those hardcore fans that have been waiting for this for a long time. And if they get nothing but negative backlash from them, then that could push them to try and clean things up and try and make it much more faithful to the original and subsequent parts.
Mm-hmm. Which is disappointing because, I mean, kind of the whole thesis of Final Fantasy VII Remake is kind of what is the legacy of this story? Is it the original, or can we as creators and creative people make a new interpretation out of it? Like, that's what this whole game is about to me, regardless of the whole story with Cloud and the Mako and everything that happens. Like, that's really what the game is about to me, is that more kind of meta storyline of kind of evaluating games and art as a whole, and what is off limits and what can you do when revisiting something that a lot of people love. And if part 2 is just, all right, here's the next act of the original Final Fantasy VII, that to me would be a failure of what this vision was setting up.
Just have to wait and see in 5-10 years whenever the second part comes out.
Yeah.
Hopefully
so we didn't really get into too many.
They can bring about a little bit more consistently.
I would hope so.
And I'd be fine if it was a little shorter. If this game took me about 30 hours to beat, if the next one's 15 to 20, I'm on board for that. I'm on board if it's a shorter game, if it means like 2-year turnarounds for these things.
Give me a 7-hour game.
Miles
Part
Morales.
5.
Go play it.
Give me a Miles Morales.
20 parts of this thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll see. We didn't talk about too many actual story specifics because I really wanted to talk about kind of how it leaves off. But before Kevin steps aside and we go full spoiler of the original, I do want to ask Kev, what's your favorite story beat, your favorite part of Final Fantasy VII Remake, if you had to pick?
It was the dance sequence, honestly.
It
was
very
so
Yakuza.
good. It was stupid. It was over the top. You get the cool like dress and stuff at the end. I thought that how they had it set up, where you were trying to follow the rhythm beats through the dance moves, was really clever. It was a bunch of fun. The music was great. Caught me off guard. I didn't think the best part of this game for me would be the one dance sequence that's in there, but after it was done, I'm like, I want to do that again. Like, I want more of this rhythm game that's in here. I know it may be a joke pick, but I'm going to be honest. That was probably the coolest moment of the game for me. It was just super dumb, super fun, and I had a smile on my face through the whole time.
Yo, real quick on that one, that actually saw a lot of changes from the original. That was a scene people were worried about because by current societal norms, some of the portrayals of those characters is very outdated in the original. And kind of the message after the dance where, I don't remember the guy's name anymore at the Honeybee Inn, but they basically say, hey, be true to yourself, you're beautiful inside. And it's just this new message, very different than what the original tells 20 years ago. So I actually think that's a good pick. I think that's a moment that a lot of people were happy with how they redid it. There were some worries that was going to be.
I can see that from 20 years ago not being a good portrayal of all that. But yeah, they pulled it off well. So. It was really good.
Zach, what's your favorite moment?
The hand massage. The really expensive hand massage. No, it's not. Okay. I think my favorite moment is probably got to be Aerith related. Either meeting Aerith or I think actually fighting Reno in the church and then escaping with Aerith. I love that. I love that part so much. And then escaping through the rafters and running away, and then making your way across the rooftops with Aerith. I don't know why. I just find that part really charming.
That part is really good. Tifa is my favorite character in the game. I love Tifa, and she has, I think, a lot more development than she does in the original because her role is kind of questioning what Avalanche is actually doing. So I just really like her whole arc and just how her relationship grows with Cloud as they're kind of rekindling. Like they were friends long ago, weren't for a while, and are again now. And I just really like their whole relationship throughout the game. And I love the cutscene where you actually get someone different depending on your choices of who you talk to and pick more. And I love that cutscene out in Aerith's yard with Tifa right before you go to Shinra
with
to
Aerith.
rescue
Yep.
Aerith.
Well, shout out to the 10 people that got Barrett.
Honestly,
it's got to be the rarest out of all of those.
Those people who love Barrett before he even gets good, he's still kind of a jerk.
I do like Barrett a lot. I also really liked climbing up the stairs and just having Barrett just back there complaining the whole time. And that just took forever because you get slower and slower and slower. And the last 15, 20 floors, you're just like, oh, let's go. And I felt the same as Barrett did going up those stairs.
Yep.
Yeah. I also really liked the after you do blow up the reactor and you're going through the town and you see the devastation you caused and everyone's kind of starts to question it, and then there's a bunch of fighting after that. But that's like completely absent from the original. Like this eco-terrorist group is not really viewed as anything is wrong. It's like, no, you're the heroes, kind of is how it's portrayed in the original. But in this one, just having that extra wrinkle of uncertainty, I thought was really well done too.
Yeah.
I love this game. It's so good.
It's a good game.
It is.
It's very good.
Yeah. Kevin, any final thoughts for you that we didn't touch on that you want to bring up?
Who do you prefer, Aerith or Tifa? I'm afraid of the answer. Because I think I know your answer.
I like both of them a lot. I'll say that. They're both great.
Right,
I love the whole cast.
Answer.
Like Tifa, Aerith, and Barrett, and Cloud as well. Like they're a great ensemble. They work together super well. Even if they're splintered a lot throughout the game, where you're only with a certain group of them for certain sections. I really like the dynamic of all of them. Man, that is hard to pick. I feel
Logan
like
and I have very firm stances on this position.
I'm in the middle. Right now, I think I'd lean slightly towards Tifa, but
I knew it.
But I don't. There's still a lot of game to go, and they're basically even for me right now. I got Tifa's the story cutscene there.
Yeah.
But I like both of them a lot.
Me too. Yeah, the whole cast is great.
Real good.
I don't like how if you get Aerith's, it's just imaginary Aerith. She's not even there. She's like a figment of Cloud's
I was wondering
imagination.
that as I got Tifa, I'm like, how would this work?
How would Aerith even be there?
Aerith
She's not
here.
Cloud is just imagining her
He's
being
just
there.
hallucinating. It's fine. He's losing his marbles. It's all good.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to bid farewell to Kevin, so we don't tell him what happens in
don't spoil me.
In the rest of the original, which we still think you should play. You should just plow through it. I turned all cheats on. I didn't care.
Yes. Times 3 speed, unlimited limit breaks. Yep. Just do it.
Just cheese the whole game.
I highly recommend. I honestly think it will make the next part a richer experience, since you know how fate said things should happen and see what they do differently.
Yep. Or they don't do differently.
Or they don't. I think it's a really unique way to experience this. So I definitely would recommend it.
All right.
Now that Kevin is gone, we can go full spoiler on it. So we are going to get into
whole game.
What happens in the original. So if you don't want to know what happens in the original, go away now. But
we do recommend you play it. I think it makes this game shine a little differently, and I think it's going to do the same thing for the sequels coming up. So definitely recommend you play it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start, Zach, with the big change that happens at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake. And
speaking of Zach.
Zach. Yeah, speaking of Zach. So while you're kind of going through this big boss gauntlet at the end, you're seeing these flashbacks to Cloud and Zach fighting together, right?
Yep. Well, no. Cloud was unconscious the whole time, I think.
Yeah, they're there together, and Zach is fighting. And go ahead.
So the way it plays out in the original is that after Zach escapes Hojo's laboratory with a very Mako poisoned Cloud, he drags Cloud to a potential new life in Midgar. And then Shinra soldiers intercept them right outside of Midgar. Zach fights them off, but is ultimately killed by the Shinra soldiers. Cloud wakes up, finds a dying Zack, is bequeathed the Buster Sword, snaps, changes his memories to where he essentially became Zack in his memories, takes the Buster Sword, and goes to live in Midgar, thus starting the first game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
or the original.
That begins the first game because he thinks that he was this great soldier, but
Yep.
he was not. He was not a great soldier.
Yeah, and then later in the game, there's all these misplaced memories, and he doesn't know what's going on, and eventually he finds out that he was so traumatized that he changed his memories just to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. And basically, Tifa helps him kind of unlock what actually happened.
Literally by going into his brain.
Yeah.
When they fall into the Mako or the live stream or whatever.
Yeah. So it's a lot, but the difference in here is that Zack lives. He defeats all the enemies. Cloud wakes up, and they walk to Midgar together, and that is how the game ends.
What does that mean? Because Zack wasn't in any part of the first remake, which means he's either just somewhere doing his own thing, or this is a third timeline.
And here's why it doesn't make sense, is because basically what this means is that when Cloud and friends defeat Fate at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, it basically means they're not just changing this point on, they're changing everything that has ever happened. It doesn't make sense. So I don't know how they're going to explain that.
So this is getting time travel wonky. So we don't know. So this means that even more could be different than we potentially think if they start from the very beginning and work their way towards the middle part of the game.
Yeah.
Because if they introduce Zack as a character even a playable character or just an NPC, that changes a lot because that is Aerith's ex-boyfriend. He's a legendary Shinra soldier. Having him on their side would be a game changer. I mean, he's better than Cloud. He's better than Cloud. So I don't think we're gonna get to use him because I think he'd be a little overpowered, which is why they killed him off in the original. But that was unexpected.
Yeah, very unexpected, very weird, and I just don't even know where it goes from here. Like, is part 2 going to be you're playing part in the past as Zack and seeing a totally new journey from his perspective, and then you're seeing Cloud and his friends do their journey? But are they in the same timeline? Could they cross paths? I just don't know, because it doesn't make sense, because Cloud's journey would be significantly different had Zack lived. So when you defeat Fate and Zack lives, but Cloud is still leaving Midgar to go find Sephiroth with his friends, one of those two things shouldn't be happening, but they both are happening simultaneously, and I don't get how that works.
I also don't get it. I don't know what direction they're going to go in. I just know that we're probably going to be seeing more of Zack in some aspects.
Yeah.
Which is exciting because he's a cool guy from what I know. I never played Crisis Core. I don't know a lot about him. I've seen some videos from some cutscenes from Crisis Core. He seems like a nice guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you find his parents' house in the original game. They talk about how much they love their son. And then Aerith mentions her ex-boyfriend briefly, which at some point you find out was Zack. I don't even remember at what point you find that out, but
yeah,
he's
excited.
He's in there. Yeah,
I'm excited to see the story told because the writing in the original is a little shoddy. Like, localizers were not nearly what they are today, so it's really hard to follow. Like, we've had to do some additional extracurricular reading.
Done plenty of summary watching and reading. It's necessary for some of these convoluted RPGs. I can't even tell you the amount of times I've watched a complete story summary of the Kingdom Hearts timeline that I still don't understand fully.
Yeah, so I hope it doesn't get quite that deep. But as far as the other events that happened in the original, like the big one is Aerith going to die in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Like, are they going to change that?
I think someone's gonna die. I think they might change who it is now. I think maybe Zach rolls in and he takes the sword. Like maybe
Mhm.
that'll happen. I don't know. It seems potential at this point. Maybe Tifa. I don't think they'd kill Tifa, but
It'd be devastation.
if I have to see Aerith die in 4K, I'm gonna cry.
Yeah, I just that could be like, what if bringing back Zack? What if that journey is entirely to prevent Aerith's death? Like, what if you play as
That
Zack
I could
and he meets up with them?
absolutely see that happening.
Hmm.
Because they're so intertwined in terms of their story and their like fate together.
Hmm.
That I think that that's what it's leaning towards. I don't know what else they would keep him around for or bring him back
Hmm.
or what to do if he is part of the current timeline
Hmm.
of what they're doing. Aerith, I think they're going to have to figure out a new way to kill Aerith because it was kind of clunky in the original. Like he came down, kind of got her from an angle, and she kind of just like slumped over. I think that's going to
Hmm.
look a little weird realistically. I think he should just come up behind her and do like an upward stab. I think that's
Okay, we
much
don't
more
need.
dramatic.
Yeah, if you
I
really
don't
want to
know
get into the
the
specifics
specifics.
of how she is murdered, but if she lives, I'm curious what will happen because then there's an ancient still left alive, right? She's one of the last ancients. Um,
Sarah, what are they called?
what?
The ancient race. They have a name.
It is eluding me.
Yeah, it's like the Sarah or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but she is one of the last ones of those, and she
Hmm.
was there in the pool to get the spell Holy in order to counteract the spell Meteor.
Hmm.
And she was the only one who was able to cast it because she is an ancient. So maybe they'd go through less trouble of actually casting that spell to. But I feel like that Aerith had to die to make the difficulty progression of the game keep going because she was the only one capable of producing the spell Holy, which would basically defeat Sephiroth.
Yeah.
Well, not defeat Sephiroth, stop his
Stop
plan.
his plan.
They still would have to beat him. So maybe, yeah, maybe saving her wouldn't be that bad. They could
Yeah.
stop Meteor and still fight Sephiroth.
Hmm. But the the party doesn't totally stop Meteor, right?
No, no, it destroys a lot before
Yeah.
the spell goes off. It
Hmm.
stops the complete destruction of the world Gaia,
Yeah.
um, but I'm pretty sure it destroys a lot.
Yeah.
I
And
think it wipes out
then
Midgar. Does it wipe out Mid?
it
No,
doesn't wipe out
there's
Midgar because then 500 years later, Red
there's like
13 and
a
his children like run up and they
like
see
a
that
really
it's
green Midgar.
yeah, which I think it signifies that the planet has kind of recovered from the
Hmm.
Mako, right? Is what that's supposed to show. So I'm
Yeah.
curious if the ending is different when if Aerith lives. Like if you think that Zack, that's kind of my theory right now. So they've said basically that the rest of the game isn't going to stray that much from the events that happen. So what if when you're playing as Cloud and friends, it doesn't, but then you have this totally new sub story as Zack, who's alive, and you play new scenario as him, old scenario as the other people, and at some point they cross paths, and that's when things change. I could see that being the route they go to, not change things too much, but still kind of live up to what they set up at the end of part one.
Yeah, I could see us playing as Zack. He's very similar in playstyle to Cloud. I don't think it'd be that much of a stretch if he was like an alternate. We jump into this timeline. We're still playing generally as the same type of character. It
Yeah.
just happens to be Zack, and we're playing through his story. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's too much of a stretch. I think it'd be a little weird. The timeline hopping, coming
Yeah.
into a cross section. It just seems like it's getting more and more complicated the more we theorize.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I do not know where they will go,
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be
which
fascinating
is
to
cool.
follow. Yeah, it is cool. I'm very excited about it. We
I
loved the first game.
Okay. The one thing I'm most excited for is the date scene at the Golden Saucer, um, with Barrett. I
Yeah,
know
with Barrett.
Kevin's probably gonna get Barrett. I'll
Kevin
get
is going to get Barrett.
Barrett, and you'll get Barrett, and we'll all have a good time.
Yeah. that is going to wrap up our spoiler cast on Final Fantasy VII Remake. Zach, you weren't here for the first half of the episode, but now you are.
What? It's timeline hopping. It's just like Final Fantasy.
Just like Zach in Final Fantasy.
Zach. I'm only here in this timeline.
Yeah,
I'm dead in the other timeline.
Oh, that's
which
really
sucks.
depressing.
It is depressing, but it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that will do it for us. Thanks so much for listening to Ode to Games. Find us on Twitter at Ode to Games. Email us odetogamescast@gmail.com. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. For those of you listening in the United States, Black Friday is right now. Lots of hot sales are going on. We'll talk about if we pick up anything on next week's show. Dragon Ball Z Kakarot? Anyone? Maybe. We'll see. We'll see if that's one of them. Hopefully Kevin plays the original, so he can join us in full for future discussions on this game.
Future Spoilercast Part 2.
Absolutely. If you
when the
like
next
this
remake comes out
Spoilercast and you want to check out another one, we did do an awesome Last of Us Part 2 Spoilercast in the summer, right after that game came out.
I love talking about that game.
Me too. I adore it. So if you want to go check out to that, recommend that. Thanks, Zach. This was a good time.
Let's do a Spoilercast for every Game Award Game of the Year nomination.
Okay, so we're 2 for 6. So
Ghost
Animal
of
Crossing
Tsushima.
Spoilercast.
Yep, absolutely.
When Tom Nook dies.
Oh my god.
It's just
murdered by his nephews.
Oh, man.
Timmy and Tommy.
Brutal. After years of unpaid labor.
Yep.
That's the dark secret. Doom Eternal, Hades, and
Ghost.
Someone's
gonna have to play it.
A Ghost spoiler.
We could do Ghost.
Deserved. Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But that is going to do it for us. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next time right here on Ode to Games.